sure if you ever had a moment in your life where you found yourself doing something that you didn't realize that you were doing. And many years I was giving a talk at a huge Catholic high school, and there was about 1,000 students in this high school. And after I gave the talk, the youth minister was telling me, she's about a week before I came, she had her kids on stage doing, in a similar kind of formation that I was in. They have this huge stage set up. And she had her kids on stage, and she had about 20 of her kids on stage, and they were presenting to the entire student body, which if you've ever presented to, 500,000 people, it's a big deal. So she had her kids on stage, and she had one of her girls, as she was waiting to go up to the middle of the stage, like I was just here, one of her girls, they were all standing like in a horseshoe shape. She was standing over here, and as she was watching the crowd, all of a sudden she reached into her pocket, and she pulled out her phone and started texting. And she's texting, and the youth minister's like over her stage, right? And she's like giving her the look. Have you ever had your parents give you the look like? And she starts going, shh, shh, Sherry, shh, shh. And the girl's like, texting away. And then she, puts her phone back in her pocket, and then she goes on stage and she does her thing, okay? She completes her speech, she goes back, and she's standing there, and the youth minister watches again, and the girl kind of gets lost in thought. All of a sudden, her hand reaches into her pocket, and she starts texting again. And then they finish their presentation, and the girl gets off stage, and the youth minister is going, what? She's like, what are you doing? What are you doing? And the girl's like, what? She's like, do you have any idea what you were just doing? And the girl's seriously befuddled. She's like, no, what are you talking about? And she's like, did you realize that you were just standing on stage for most of your presentation texting? And this girl, like this wave of like hot emotion, her face blushed and her cheeks blushed, and she said, no, I had no idea. And the youth minister said, you don't remember that? She said, no, I have no idea. Have you ever in life found yourself doing something, and what you were doing, you didn't realize that it was something that was that big of a deal? Or maybe something that you didn't know about yourself, and all of a sudden you're doing this, and then you said to yourself you weren't going to do it anymore, and then here you are doing it again. Or maybe one of your friends, you're driving in the car, and you have that tone of voice, and she's like, you're doing that again. That thing you're doing that I hate, you're doing that again. And you're like, I am? I didn't know that about myself. And there's so many things in life. As I was sitting here and I was just praying for you all this morning, and I met you a little bit last night, but just to tell you a little bit about myself, my name is Sister Miriam James, and I've had the honor of just being with many of you over the years, and I know, a lot of your parents, and I do a lot of adult ministry and things like that. But one of the things I do is a part of just the way the Lord has opened my heart is I journey often with people into the deepest places of their hearts. And what we're going to talk about today in just the short time that I have with you today is we're going to actually talk about something called hidden wounds, right? So the beautiful thing about our lives and the beautiful thing about our hearts and our stories is many times it's only love that comes to reveal the deepest places of our hearts, of things we didn't know about ourselves, things we didn't know about life. And what love does, love comes into the deepest places of our soul to bring us to life and to set us free. What you and I did just now is where we were all standing here, and we took a deep breath in, and you put your hand on your heart. Every single one of us here, and as I was praying for you this morning, just looking at your faces, because see, I have the best seat in the house right now. It's because I can see your faces. And that's the deepest desire of the human heart, is to be seen. It's also our deepest fear as well. We want to be seen, but we don't. We want to be known, but we don't. We want to be loved, but we don't. And we all have places where we want somebody to know this about our hearts, but then all the places that we hide so desperately. And every single one of us, as myself included, as we stood here and we put our hand on our heart, every single one of us in this room has desires. And we have dreams. And we have hopes. And we have things in our life that we want to accomplish. And we have mysteries in our life that are beyond our ability and our comprehension to solve. And every single one of us here in our life has areas that have been wounded, where our hearts have been wounded. And the beautiful thing is as I had you reach out and put your hand on the shoulder of the person next to you, is that they have the exact same thing. That you know what, no matter what people present or what they look like on the surface, that every single one of us has places where love has been ruptured, where love has been withheld or withdrawn. And no matter how we grow up, none of us grows up in a perfect home, and every single one of us has moments in our life where we wanted somebody to see us and we wanted somebody to love us, and they just couldn't or they didn't do it. And over time, my dear friends, what happens is we kind of tell ourselves, like, well, it's okay, it's not a big deal. I'll totally get over that. And we get to be adults like my age, and then we say it's not a big deal. And you know what? It's totally a big deal. Because what we do is when we look at other people, we often have opinions, don't we? We kind of form. Have you ever looked at somebody and you totally make a snap judgment of them? And then like a year later, you hear their story like, oh, geez, I was way off on that one, Because quite frankly, we have no idea what other people hold. We have no idea what other people hold in their hearts, what they hold in their stories. And sometimes, Katie was sharing a beautiful story in the women's session this morning about where, her daughter was playing on the playground with these other girls, and these little girls already at that young age, they're making fun of each other. And the things that we say to people, and as we get older, we're more sophisticated in how we attack people and how we criticize them. And the only reason why we're doing that is because our hearts are broken. And in the deepest places, you and I want to be loved. So just an example here as I kind of talk about this. Maybe for some of you, you might be looking at me, and I've been a religious sister. I'm a part of the member of the Society of Our Lady of the Most Holy Trinity. I live in the great nation of Texas, okay? So I live very far south. And so I've been in my community about 24 years. And so I played Division I volleyball in college. I jokingly said I did want to work for ESPN. That was the goal of my life. And then Aaron Andrews stole my job. I became a nun instead. That's what happened. So totally kidding. Kind of. I still love sports. But when I was in college, I wanted to be somebody. I was in high school. I wanted to be somebody, and I was really good at sports, and I was really good at school. And I thought, I'm just going to do this thing, and I'm just going to live my life, and I'm going to be happy. And so, I became a religious sister, and you might be looking at me saying, well, what does your life have to do anything with our life? And the truth is, because we're people, all of us we overlap, and we intersect in the most beautiful and broken places as well. But you know what? I sit here before you today as somebody who's been in my religious community 24 years. But I also sit here before you today as a recovering alcoholic. I started drinking when I was 12. And after that, I was sexually violated. I lived a life of many years of great promiscuity. I had an addiction to alcohol and to lust. I was introduced to pornography when I was very young. And if you would have asked me when I was much younger, how are you doing? I would have told you, I'm fine. I'm fine. I don't have any problems. I'm totally fine. But inside, I was just absolutely dying. And maybe that's not part of your story. Because things don't come out of nowhere. And what I want to talk about is, sometimes we hear talks about just, wounds, or we talk about, just maybe addictions we have. But see, every single one of us, just the beautiful, most wonderful, impoverished thing about being a human being is that we're all so incredibly little. And, underneath our deepest shame, whatever in your heart right now that you're most ashamed of, and maybe you really want to go to confession about that, or you really want to tell somebody, but all of us have these places where it's like, me, I really want to be free. Also me, I hate this, I can't stand it. And maybe you want to go to confession, but you're like, that thing where you go to confession and you have that sin that you don't really want to talk about, so you bury it in between two other things that are not that bad. And you're kind of hoping the priest doesn't notice. Okay, maybe I'm the only one who's done that. Okay, maybe that's not you. And we're just so afraid of these places in our hearts where our hearts have been wounded. And so what we do many times, my dear friends, is in life is we're managing our life up here. We're managing in what we call symptoms management or behavior management. And we're living our life up here, and we're looking at people saying, man, why don't you act better? Why don't you get your act together? Why do you got to be so rude? Why do you got to be so cruel? And most of us don't understand is the reason why what's manifesting up here is because our hearts are broken down here. And it's only here in the deep places where our lives begin to be transformed. So can I just kind of give you a definition? Could you all pull my PowerPoint up for me? Can I just give you a definition of trauma? I want to talk about trauma. I want to talk about wounds. I'm not sure if they can see that. Trauma is actually the Greek word for wound. And so when we say, you might be thinking in your heart right now, well, maybe I don't have any wounds. I'm not traumatized. I don't have any wounds. Every single one of us, just by virtue of being a human person, is wounded. We've all had places where love has been withheld or love has been withdrawn. So let me just give you an example, a very kind of, it's kind of a psychological definition of trauma, which would be this, an event that overwhelms our ability to cope, leaving us feeling powerless and helpless. An event or our response to an event which overwhelms our ability to cope, leaving us feeling powerless and helpless. And every single one of us today, myself included, have had events in our life that have overwhelmed our ability to cope, and where we can be 12, 15, 17, 20, 45, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 years old, and we still feel powerless and overwhelmed. We still feel powerless and helpless. And it's these places in our lives, my dear friends, that I want to appeal to you today in these places, because it's these places that are driving a lot of why you and I do what we do. It is one thing for us, and I go to confession all the time. I'm a nun because that's what we do. I go to confession all the time. I just went this morning, as a matter of fact, okay? And we go, and that's really, really important. But you know what? If we're not going and our heart isn't open to what's present at the deepest level, what we do is we keep doing the same thing over and over and over again. And if you've ever wondered why in your life you're doing the same thing over and over and over again, have you ever done that thing where you said you weren't going to do it anymore? I know I've had it happen in my life in the area of addiction, of lust, of pornography, of promiscuity, those places in my life. I've done it in the area of gossip. I've had moments in my life where I was just so unkind to somebody, where I remember when I was in high school, I picked on people in high school because I hated myself so much. We've all had those things that we've done to us. And then, as I get older and I'm growing in my religious life as a woman, where I want to love excellently, I want to be well, and you say to yourself, okay, when I see that person again, I'm not going to say that to them, or I'm going to be kind. And then you do the thing you swore you weren't going to do, and you find yourself back in the same situation. You're like, man, why am I doing what I'm doing? Why am I doing what I'm doing? So can I just tell you this? There's a really good reason why you're doing what you're doing. That nothing in your life comes out of nowhere, my dear friends. And nothing in your life stays out of nowhere. There's a reason why you do what you do in your room by yourself at night. There's a reason why you hide that certain thing that you hide. There's a reason why what sets your heart on fire, sets your heart on fire. There's actually in our life, it all makes sense. And a lot of the reasons why the broken things, why we're doing what we're doing, is because our hearts have been ruptured by wounds where love has been withheld and love has been withdrawn, and we're stuck in a deep place of powerlessness and helplessness, even if we don't want to admit it. And our lives have been shattered. And what you and I are doing in our life is we're trying to help mitigate against the pain in our life. St. Julian of Norwich, I love one of her quotes, and she says this: when God sees our sin, he sees our pain. When God sees our sin, he sees our pain. When you and I see our sin and we see the sin of other people, many times we are harsh, we are cruel, we hate ourselves. All the areas where you and I hold such deep shame, just like Adam and Eve when they sin, what is their first response? Their first response is to hide, is to put on fig leaves and hide. And you and I have very sophisticated fig leaves that we put on. We have different ones for different occasions. We put, oh, that's going to look nice. I'll wear this one. We're so great at what we do. And inside, we're so afraid that if you really saw who I was, if you really saw the depth, I'm not just saying it to saying it, but we have this, shame isn't just an idea. It's not just a concept. We have a visceral experience to it. Where it takes over our bodies. We feel our heart racing. We feel sick to our stomach. Our shoulders cave in. It's that thing that happens to you when you do the thing you said you weren't going to do and you do it. Or that fear that keeps plaguing you. We're talking this weekend about fearlessness and the fear that keeps plaguing us. And the fear is a self-protection against something that feels much greater. And so fear comes around that place, and our whole bodies respond to it, and we hold so much trauma in our bodies. And what the Lord is doing is he's coming to the depths. He's coming to the middle of it. Because you know what? Let's all admit that if we could have done it on our own by now, we would have done it. If you could have solved the problem in your life, if you could have solved your anxiety or solved your addiction to pornography or solved your eating disorder or solved your parents' marriage, or that thing in your life where you are the kid, you go to youth group every Sunday and you're homeschooled and all these things, and you're thinking, well, my life isn't really that bad, but there's that party inside that you're just like, man, I feel like I have to perform for love. Or I feel like I have to fit in. Like, I don't want to do what these guys are doing, but I feel like I have to do it. Like, what's wrong with me? I just want to tell you, in all of that, there's nothing wrong with you. Your heart has just been broken. And you and I, even as adults, we spend so much of our life managing up here. But the Lord desires to bring us down here. And there's a wonderful story in the Gospel of Matthew, and it's not a parable, it's actually a story, of a woman who is hemorrhaging. And you and I, we have different places of our life that we actually hemorrhage. Okay, can you go to my next slide? And when we hemorrhage, it actually brings us, it just bleeds us of life. It bleeds us of all the places where we hold life, where our hearts are just aching. And when we hemorrhage, it drains us of life, and it either kills us outright or just slowly leaks the life that we have within us. And this is what is happening in the Gospel of Mark chapter 5. And look, this is not a parable, my friends. So I'm going to read this to you. I'm just going to invite you just to notice kind of what happens in your heart as I read this. And this says in the Gospel of Mark, it says, there was a woman afflicted with hemorrhages for 12 years. And a woman who's hemorrhaging is a woman who's bleeding. And she's ritually unclean. And if you're bleeding and you're unclean, you're not living in your home with your husband and your family. You're ritually living outside of the community. And anything in Jewish culture at that time, anything you touched, any person you touched, anything you touched would be unclean. And anybody that touched you would be unclean. And how many of us sit here today when we have areas of our life where we feel very unclean? And there are places of our hearts that are unhealed wounds, like we said, that where we feel powerless and hopeless in these places, and we're stuck in this cycle, and we're just trying to make our lives better. And we just say to ourselves, if I just try harder, I can get over this. And we do, don't we? And this woman did too. It says she had suffered greatly at the hands of many doctors and had spent all she had, yet she was not helped, but only grew worse. How many of us in our life, myself included, have done that? Where with whatever your presenting symptom is, my dear friends, like we all have, whatever it's depression, anxiety, whatever it is, where we try to fix ourselves. And yes, I'm not saying we shouldn't go to doctors because doctors can help us, but we compartmentalize and we kind of become self-reliant and we're just looking for that one thing that would fix it. And we just say to Jesus, I've said this to Jesus literally before, like, just fix me. Like, just fix me. Like, this is literally bleeding the life out of me. Just fix me. And how often, he's so lovely. How often Jesus has said to me, I'm not here to fix you. I'm here to love you. I'm here to love you. And so whatever that thing is happening in your heart right now, my dear friends, where you feel like you're hemorrhaging and it's that repetitive sin or it's the scourge in your heart or it's a secret that you've never told anybody. And I've spent many years going to 12-step meetings, and there's some wonderful wise sayings in 12-step meetings. And one of them that I often quote is this: we're only as sick as our secrets. We're only as sick as our secrets. And we have secrets, don't we? We have secrets. Marriages have secrets. Families have secrets. Some secrets in the family is like what happens in our family, we don't tell anybody. We circle the wagons. We don't talk about this stuff. We're the so-and-so family. We don't talk about this. Or we don't admit to these things. Or whatever happened with your dad, your mom's like, don't tell anybody what your dad does. Don't tell anybody because people won't think well of us. And those secrets break our heart and they make us sick. And they bleed the life out of us. And they make us feel unclean because we feel like we can't go to anybody. And you know what the secondary trauma that we all have is? All of us have, a primary trauma of whatever that is, a love withheld or love withdrawn or the perfectionism or the place where you feel like you don't fit in or it's the addiction to whatever that is for you. And then right behind it, my dear friends, is a secondary trauma of this, having nobody safe to tell it to. And so we're isolated, much like this woman who is now ritually unclean. She lives out of community and she's completely isolated. And now she's come to the end of her own resources. She has no help left. And she's completely, talk about totally helpless and totally powerless. And what happens, Christ at that time is very famous. And this beautiful chapter of Mark, I love it. There's so much healing in this chapter. He's very famous by this time. And she hears of his healing and she goes into the crowd. And I'm sure people are looking at her because everybody knows. And so we've all had situations maybe at school where you did the thing you weren't supposed to do, or you sent a picture to that guy and he was like, hey girl, send it to me, and you did, and then he shared it with all of his friends. And right now you bear the shame of that, and maybe you're the guy who did it and you bear it too. And people are looking at her and they're like, oh, don't touch her, like don't touch her. And you can just see her desperation, you can see her heart there. And she says, if I could only but touch his clothes, I shall be cured. And she reaches out to do so. And from that, this whole interaction comes with Christ because he feels the power of not just somebody wanting to be fixed, but somebody wanting to be loved. Because you know what? In the places of all of our shame, where we self-criticize, where we are isolated, where it feels like the total thing that encompasses us, where we define ourselves by our sin, I really believe if we could be very honest in the deepest places, would be this little vulnerable part that everybody has, where we would just say, I just want to be loved. I just want to be loved. Like for me. I don't know, I want to be loved right here, not when I get my crap together. I just want to be loved. I just want to be loved right here. And this woman is coming to Christ ritually unclean and hemorrhaging, saying, I just want to be loved. Can you come and bring me into wholeness and communion? And isn't that really in these deep places, my dear friends? And if I could just take your hand very gently, and I'm sitting down for a reason, because I just want to, can I take you just a little bit farther in this story? Some of the deepest places, especially, is wounds of a sexual nature, which always inflict the deepest shame. Shame is a result of brokenness, is a result of a rupture of communion. Lust is a result of a rupture of communion. And all these places are a result. But I think the area, especially of sexual sin, it brings us to the deepest shame and the deepest sorrow. It brings us to the deepest confusion and also to the deepest desire. Because every single one of us here today, no matter what you're holding in your heart, is we want to love well. And we want to love excellently. And nobody wants to be the person, though we've all do it. Nobody wants to be the person who wants to use or to be used. We don't want to do that. It's why you want to see your parents happy. It's why you want to see your friends happy. It's why when we have ruptures in relationship, why it breaks us. Every single one of us at these deep places, we want to be well and we want to be loved. And can I just say this to you, and I say this to you out of immense love of just my own journey and journeying with so many people, especially in the area of pornography. Can I just invite you just to consider that desire in your heart of what's happening there, however it's manifesting. That it's something far beyond that presenting symptom of what you're doing as you look at that. But I just want to appeal you to, maybe for the first time in your life, to consider what's at the root. I'm going to ask you, what are you really looking for? What are you really looking for? Because it's actually scientifically proven that even the kind of pornography you look at, the exact words that you put in the key search to look at that pornography is really revealing the exact place where your heart has been shattered. What you fantasize about up here, what's going on in your life up here, this is telling you something about where your heart has been broken. And these, my dear friends, these are the places where we feel powerless and hopeless, where our hearts have been shattered. When people come into even the area of like the addiction of masturbation, that anything that has been purported upon you or given to you, it's a deep violation. And I prayed with people in so many of these places where they first discovered pornography, they first discovered masturbation, or they first had a sexual encounter, and it's filled with so much shame. Because many times they don't understand what's happening here. And when those things happen to us, they're deeply violating. And we hear stories of like, oh, I found it myself, or all these, and there's so many, as many as there is a story of how that came to be in your life. That is the very place, and it might seem counterintuitive to you, but these are the places to which we must go to receive healing and restoration. Because it's these places, my dear friends, that Christ is present in your life. That Jesus Christ, he was there that day that happened. And he's there the day that it happens even now. And I want to tell you that he's not ashamed of you. And he's not embarrassed of you. And if you and I, if we truly want to be well, not only in this area of our life, but in the areas of our life where we feel like we have to perform, the areas of our life we're crippled with anxiety, the areas of our life where we're so afraid to tell anybody about our secrets, even the areas of our life, and I know this is really uncomfortable for some of us, and I just want to honor your heart that I know it's hard. But these are the deep areas of our life, my dear friends, where Christ is present, where his heart is for you to bring you into wholeness and communion. Because it is not enough for us just to keep saying, I'm not going to do that anymore. If we want to be well, it's time to tell the truth, right? And it's very beautiful because what happens in this is her blood of flow, she's immediately cured. As she reaches out, she touches the hem of Christ's garment, she's immediately cured. And it's so powerful that power goes out of Christ, and he stops the crowd, and they're pressing in on him. He's so famous, they're pressing in on him. And he turns around and he says, who touches me? Who touched me? And the disciples were like, man, there's people pressing in on you. And who touched me? And the crowd, I know it doesn't say this, but the crowd would have gone absolutely silent. Until what? This woman comes forward. And Mark says she comes forward in fear and trembling. And she comes forward and she bows low before him. And she tells him and she tells the entire crowd her whole story. And a lot of that story would have been about those people in the crowd who shamed her and who ridiculed her. And she would have gone and she would have said, this is what happened to me. I've been unclean. I've spent all my money. I'm totally helpless and totally forlorn, and I needed help. And you came, and my life is different. And it's so lovely because it is one of the most first public, powerful testimonies that we have of Christ's healing, right there with this woman. And he looks at her like he looks at you, as I see your face even now. And he says, my daughter, or if it was a man, he could say, my son, your faith has made you well. You go in peace. You go in peace. Because it is only authentic love, my dear friends. It is only authentic love that heals broken love in our life. That is the only thing that heals. Only authentic love heals the broken love in our life. Not anything else. And so where is Christ in your heart right now, inviting you to an encounter? Because see, in the Gospel of Mark, I love what it says. It says the woman knelt down and she told the whole truth. She told the whole truth. And did you know, and some of you probably have this experience before, did you know to this day in the American system court of law, if you are a witness in a trial, before you give your testimony, you will be asked, and we used to put our hand in the Bible, and you will be asked this, do you solemnly swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God? To which your response, hopefully, is I do. And there's something powerful about telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth in God's love. Because that's what heals us. It is His truth that heals us. And so the theme of this whole entire weekend, what Jesus says, I told you this so you might have peace in me. And not just a peace, it's like an absence of war. I told you the deepest meaning of peace is rightly ordered relationships. I told you this so you might have peace in me, because in the world you're going to have trouble. But take heart, you take courage, because I've overcome the world. And this is not just a nice saying. And what is the this? Like I've told you this, what is the this? This is from the Last Supper discourses, where he's telling them what's going to happen to him. He's telling them what's going to happen to them. And he's saying, I'm telling you all of this. You're going to leave me. I'm going to be, God's still going to be with me. You and I are going to be one. I want you to be in the Father's love. I want you to be with me. And I'm telling you all this. It's like me sitting here before you today, just like a small person. I'm telling you this. I'm just telling you this so you can encounter the Lord's love in these places. So that you and I in our life do not have to continue the path we've been living. That there's something more. And that every single one of us in this room bears hidden wounds in a variety of things, And I think if we could understand that about each other and ask the Lord to give us his heart there, it might transform our own.